The stone floor beneath Blanca of Nava's feet was bitterly cold, as if the castle itself wanted to suck the warmth from her bones. Ruin's thick February air pressed heavily against the narrow chamber, filled with dampness, silence, and dread. The fire in the hearth had long since died to a flicker, and yet no one seemed in any hurry to stoke it. They were not there for warmth. They were there for truth. Or rather, what passed for truth in a world built upon superstition and fear. Blanca stood naked, trembling not from the chill, but from the unbearable anticipation of what would come next. Her fingers were clenched tightly at her sides, nails digging crescent moons into her palms. In her mind, she repeated fragments of prayers she had learned as a child, but none reached her lips. She would not beg, not here. Not before these women. The two midwives were ancient things, faces wrinkled like parchment, eyes dull with routine, hands practiced and unfeeling. They did not look at her with cruelty, but neither did they look with compassion. She was a task, a body, a checklist. Their fingers would be the first to determine if she was still pure. Their voices would be the ones that either confirmed her virtue or condemned her to ruin. The Duchess of Bedford, draped in velvet and judgment, watched from a cushioned chair set against the far wall. Her expression was unreadable, neither scornful nor warm, but sharpened with calculation. Blanca could feel the Duchess's eyes tracing every inch of her exposed form, not with desire, but with the quiet satisfaction of a master observing a piece of livestock before purchase or rejection. She was 29 years old, a queen by title, a wife by ceremony, a woman by nature, and yet in the eyes of this room she was nothing until the words were spoken. 13 years she had lain beside King Henry IV of Castile. 13 years of ceremonial embraces and whispered nothings, but no touch, no intimacy, no consummation. Not once had he entered her chambers with more than obligation, and the court had noticed. Whispers followed her like a second cloak, that she was barren, that she was cursed, that she was not a woman at all. And now, with the marriage on the brink of annulment, this final test had been ordered, not of love, not of loyalty, but of her flesh. The midwives gestured silently for her to lie back. The stone slab beneath her felt colder than the floor. She had never been this vulnerable, not as a child, not during illness, not even on her wedding night. Her thighs were parted by the midwives' firm hands. They spoke in low Latin phrases she barely understood, words like intacta, conspecta, nota. Their fingers moved with expertise, searching for that fragile evidence that could exonerate or damn her. She felt shame burn inside her chest, but she bit it down. This was not the moment for tears. The Duchess leaned forward, listening as the midwives murmured their conclusion. One of them stepped forward, bowed slightly, and spoke. "She is Virgo intacta." The room did not cheer. No breath of relief was given. The Duchess simply turned to the scribe in the corner and said, "Write it down, seal it." That was all. Blanca sat up slowly, wrapping the linen sheet around her body, her hands trembling. Something inside her had cracked, but nothing on her face showed it. She had passed. She had won. And yet she felt nothing. Not joy, not triumph. Only the cold. The truth, of course, was that this horror was not hers alone. Across Europe, queens, princesses, noble women, those born into privilege, were stripped of privacy and dignity the moment they reached puberty. Their virginity was not a private matter. It was public currency, a political weapon, a condition of contract, a means of proving worth. Some were examined before marriage, to ensure purity. Others, like Blanca, were examined long after, when political tides turned and their usefulness had expired. Many were examined twice, once to prove they were untouched, and again to prove they had failed to be touched. The tests varied in form, but never in cruelty. A noble woman in Italy had been handed a sieve and ordered to fill it with water. The belief was this: if she were pure, the water would stay, as if her virtue could plug holes drilled by iron. Another had been told to urinate in a chamber pot in front of 6 clergymen, while a physician listened to the sound. A pure woman, he claimed, had a stream that hissed softly and took longer to begin, an impure one. Well, her stream was untrustworthy, like her soul. Others were smoked, literally smoked, forced to squat over hot coals while midwives covered them with a cloth. If the scent came through the nose or mouth, they were guilty. If they smelled nothing, they were virtuous. Women coughed, choked, burned. No one cared. Even worse were the tests conducted under the guise of science: the color of urine, the texture of skin, the placement of breasts. There were physicians who wrote treatises claiming that a virgin's body was always pale, the urine always clear, the nipples always high. The absurdity would have been laughable, if not for the stakes. If a woman failed, it was not merely embarrassment, it was ruin. She could be cast aside, annulled, exiled, imprisoned. In some cultures, failure meant public execution. In others, being sent to a convent, never to see daylight again. In all, it meant the loss of name, place, and safety. Blanca knew these stories. She had heard them whispered behind tapestries by servants, discussed in cautious tones by noble women. The queen who bled too soon, the princess whose first husband died before the wedding night, the girl who claimed she had fallen on a sharp branch, and no one believed her, the midwife who lied to save a girl's life, and was later hanged for it. It wasn't always men who wielded the blade. Women turned on women too, some out of fear, others for favor, and some tragically, because they had been told from birth that their virtue meant nothing unless it could be proven. Even Joan of Arc, savior of France, was subjected to this hell. Before she could be burned as a heretic, she was first stripped and examined, not to find signs of sorcery, but to ensure she was still a virgin. Because if she was not, her visions could be dismissed as seductions of the devil. A woman's body, even in glory, was never hers. Blanca remembered reading about that. She imagined Joan, young, armored, victorious, lying bare beneath noble eyes, not for healing, not for mercy, but for proof. As Blanca dressed in silence, her ladies waiting in the corridor with carefully blank expressions, she realized something profound. She was no freer now than when she had walked into that room. She was still property, just a piece of land in a silk gown passed from man to man based on whether her body remained unmarked by pleasure. And though her name would be cleared, her marriage annulled, and her royal prospects restored, something inside her had been stolen that day. Not her virtue, not her power, but the illusion that either had ever belonged to her. She stepped into her slippers, chin held high, and walked from the room without a word. The castle's corridors were quiet, but she imagined the whispers had already begun. They would say she was pure, they would say she was lucky, but they would never ask if she was whole, and that, Blanca knew, was the oldest truth of all.